Danny Martinez was holding practice with second-hand gloves and bases made from cardboard when he noticed her. The woman in the expensive sunglasses sitting alone in the bleachers, watching not the game, but him. The way he encouraged every missed catch and celebrated every small victory. He had no idea she was Alexandra Kane, one of the most powerful sports agents in the country, or that she was about to transform his ragtag team of forgotten kids into something extraordinary. He couldn't have imagined that his simple act of stepping up when no one else would had just caught the attention of someone who could change everything. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Community Park as Danny Martinez pulled his dented Honda Civic into the gravel parking lot, the trunk loaded with a collection of baseball equipment that had seen better decades. Mismatched gloves held together with duct tape, aluminum bats with grip tape unraveling from their handles, and a canvas bag filled with baseballs that had lost their pristine white color years ago. But for Danny and the 12 kids who showed up every Saturday morning at 8 sharp, this collection of worn gear represented something precious: opportunity. Danny had never intended to become a baseball coach. 3 years ago, when his 8-year-old son Miguel had expressed interest in joining the local Little League, Danny had assumed it would be a simple matter of registration and letting the professionals handle the rest. But Riverside wasn't the kind of neighborhood that attracted experienced coaches or generous sponsors. Most of the kids came from single-parent households or families where both parents worked multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. The few organized leagues that existed catered to the more affluent parts of town, where parents could afford registration fees, proper equipment, and the time commitment that came with competitive youth sports. When the local recreation department announced they were canceling the Saturday morning baseball program due to lack of volunteer coaches, Danny found himself faced with a choice that would define his relationship with his son, and his community. He could drive Miguel to one of the more established leagues 20 minutes away, spending money they didn't really have and time that was already stretched thin between his job at the automotive parts warehouse and his evening classes at the community college. Or he could step into a role he felt completely unqualified for and try to give these kids something they deserved. The decision came during a conversation with Miguel that had started about baseball but evolved into something much more significant. They were sitting at their small kitchen table, sharing a dinner of boxed macaroni and cheese, supplemented with canned green beans, when Miguel mentioned that his friend Carlos wouldn't be playing baseball this year because there wasn't a team anymore. "What do you mean there's no team?" Danny had asked, looking up from the textbook he was reviewing for his logistics management class. "Mr. Johnson moved away, and he was the only coach," Miguel explained with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often display when adults fail to meet their expectations. "Mom said maybe next year someone else will do it." Danny felt a familiar stab of guilt at the mention of Miguel's mother. Sarah had been gone for 2 years now, not through death or divorce, but through the more complicated dissolution that occurred when someone decided that the responsibilities of parenthood were more than they could handle. She sent birthday cards and the occasional text message, but the day-to-day reality of raising Miguel had fallen entirely to Danny, a responsibility he had accepted without complaint, but not without struggle. "What if I coach the team?" Danny heard himself asking before he had fully processed the implications of the offer. Miguel's eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. "You don't know how to coach baseball, Dad." "I played in high school," Danny replied, though that experience felt like a lifetime ago. "And I know how to teach people things. How hard could it be?" The answer, as Danny discovered over the following weeks, was considerably harder than he had anticipated, but also more rewarding than he could have imagined. Organizing practices required coordinating schedules with parents who worked irregular hours, finding field time at the community park, and somehow assembling enough equipment to outfit 12 kids whose families couldn't afford to purchase proper gear. Danny approached the challenge with the same methodical persistence that had helped him maintain steady employment and pursue his education while raising Miguel alone. He scoured thrift stores for gloves and bats, convinced local businesses to donate used equipment, and spent his own money on basics like baseballs and first aid supplies. More importantly, He spent hours online researching coaching techniques, watching instructional videos, and learning about the fundamentals of youth baseball development. The first practice had been a disaster by conventional standards. Half the kids didn't have proper gloves, most had never held a bat before, and Danny's carefully planned drills dissolved into chaos within the first 15 minutes. But as he watched 12-year-old Carlos struggle to catch a pop fly with a glove that was too big for his hand, and saw the determination in 10-year-old Sophia's eyes as she swung at pitch after pitch without making contact, Danny realized that success in this context would be measured differently than in the organized leagues he had imagined joining. 3 months into the season, Danny had developed a coaching philosophy that prioritized encouragement over criticism, effort over results, and inclusion over competition. Every kid who showed up got to play, regardless of skill level. Every practice ended with a group discussion about what they had learned and what they wanted to work on next week. And every player received the same level of attention and support, whether they were natural athletes or kids who struggled with the basic mechanics of throwing and catching. The transformation in the kids was gradual but unmistakable. Carlos, who had started the season afraid of the ball, was now volunteering to play catcher. Sophia had developed a swing that, while unconventional, made consistent contact and reflected hours of practice in her backyard. Miguel, initially embarrassed by his father's amateur coaching, had become the team's unofficial assistant coach, helping younger players with their stance and offering encouragement when frustration threatened to overcome determination. But it was the change in the parents that surprised Danny most. What had started as a desperate attempt to provide their children with recreational opportunities had evolved into a community of adults who showed up early to help set up equipment, stayed late to clean up the field, and organized carpools to ensure that every kid could participate regardless of transportation challenges. The Saturday morning practices had become a social hub for families who might otherwise have remained isolated in their individual struggles. Danny was arranging the makeshift bases he had cut from cardboard and painted with Miguel's help when he noticed the woman in the bleachers. She was sitting alone, wearing expensive sunglasses and clothes that suggested an income level significantly higher than most of the families in their neighborhood. Her presence was noteworthy, not just because she was unfamiliar, but because she was watching the practice with the kind of focused attention that suggested professional interest rather than casual observation. Alexandra Kane had arrived at Riverside Community Park with no intention of staying longer than necessary. Her assistant had scheduled a site visit to evaluate the facility for a potential corporate partnership, part of a comprehensive review of youth sports programs in underserved communities. The Kane Foundation, which Alexandra had established 2 years earlier with the goal of expanding athletic opportunities for disadvantaged children, was considering a pilot program in the greater metropolitan area, and Riverside had been identified as a potential location. What Alexandra expected to find was a typical underfunded recreation program, well-meaning but poorly organized, staffed by volunteers with good intentions but limited expertise. What she discovered instead was something that challenged her assumptions about youth sports development and reminded her why she had gotten involved in athletics in the first place. Danny Martinez was not the kind of coach that Alexandra typically encountered in her professional capacity. He lacked the credentials, the polished presentation, and the systematic approach that characterized successful youth sports programs. But as Alexandra watched him interact with his players, she recognized something that was often missing from more established programs: authentic caring. When 10-year-old Marcus struck out for the third consecutive time and threw his helmet in frustration, Danny didn't deliver a lecture about sportsmanship or send him to sit on the bench. Instead, he walked over to the boy, knelt down to his eye level, and spent several minutes talking quietly about the mechanics of batting and the importance of persistence. When Marcus nodded and picked up his helmet, Danny patted him on the shoulder and sent him back to try again. When the team's only girl, Sophia, made a spectacular catch in the outfield, Danny's celebration was genuine and infectious, prompting cheers from teammates and parents alike. But more importantly, he used the moment to reinforce specific techniques and encourage other players to observe what Sophia had done well. The teaching was seamless, integrated into the natural flow of practice, rather than delivered as formal instruction. Alexandra had spent her career evaluating athletic talent and coaching ability, first as a college athlete herself, then as a sports agent representing professional athletes, and finally as someone who invested in youth sports programs. She could recognize technical proficiency, strategic thinking, and the ability to develop talent. But what she was observing at Riverside Community Park was something different, the kind of leadership that inspired kids to believe in themselves and their teammates. The practice continued for another hour, with Danny rotating players through different positions, adjusting drills based on individual needs, and maintaining an atmosphere that was simultaneously focused and relaxed. Alexandra noticed that he never raised his voice, never singled out a player for criticism, and never allowed frustration to show when drills didn't proceed as planned. Instead, he maintained a steady stream of encouragement, specific feedback, and gentle correction that kept the kids engaged and motivated. When practice ended, Alexandra watched as Danny organized the cleanup process with the same attention to detail that had characterized the training session. Every player had a responsibility, from collecting equipment to folding the bases he had clearly made himself. The parents who had stayed to watch helped with the larger tasks, creating a sense of community ownership that Alexandra rarely saw in youth sports programs. As the families began to disperse, Alexandra made a decision that would ultimately change the trajectory of Danny's coaching career and the lives of his players. Instead of returning to her car and adding Riverside Community Park to her list of potential sites for future consideration, she walked down from the bleachers and approached Danny as he was loading equipment into his BI trunk. "Excuse me," Alexandra said, extending her hand with a smile that was both professional and genuinely warm. "I'm Alexandra Kane. I was watching your practice, and I'm very impressed with what you're doing here." Danny looked up from the canvas bag he was stuffing with baseballs, taking in Alexandra's expensive clothes and confident demeanor with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. His experience with well-dressed strangers who showed interest in his team had been limited, but he had learned to be cautious about people who made promises they might not keep. "Danny Martinez," he replied, shaking her hand. "Are you thinking about signing up one of your kids for the team?" Alexandra smiled at the assumption, recognizing that Danny had no idea who she was or why she might be interested in his program. "Actually, I don't have children. I run a foundation that supports youth sports programs, and I was hoping to learn more about what you're doing here." Danny's expression shifted from wariness to skepticism. He had encountered representatives from various organizations over the months, people who asked lots of questions and made vague promises about potential support that never materialized. The kids had learned not to get excited about adult promises, and Danny had learned to be protective of their expectations. "What kind of foundation?" Danny asked, continuing to pack equipment while maintaining eye contact with Alexandra. "The Kane Foundation focuses on expanding athletic opportunities for kids in underserved communities," Alexandra explained. "We provide funding for equipment, facility improvements, coaching education, and program development." Danny nodded politely, but Alexandra could see that he remained skeptical. "That sounds great, but I should probably mention that we're not really an official program. We're just a group of parents and kids who get together on Saturday mornings to play baseball." "That's exactly what makes it interesting," Alexandra replied. "I've visited dozens of youth sports programs, and most of them are focused on competition and performance metrics. What I saw here today was something different, kids learning to love the game while developing confidence and teamwork skills." Danny straightened up from his packing, giving Alexandra his full attention for the first time. "Most people think we're not serious enough because we don't keep score or eliminate kids who aren't naturally athletic. Most people are wrong," Alexandra said firmly. "What you're doing here is exactly what youth sports should be about. The question is whether you'd be interested in doing more of it." Danny felt the familiar mixture of hope and caution that had defined his approach to opportunities that seemed too good to be true. "What do you mean by more?" Alexandra had been preparing for this conversation without realizing it, formulating an approach that would respect Danny's obvious dedication while offering the resources that could transform his program. "I mean proper equipment, facility improvements, coaching education, and the support system that would allow you to expand this program and reach more kids." And what would you want in return? Danny asked, his tone suggesting that he had learned to look for the catch in generous offers. Alexandra appreciated his directness, recognizing the wariness of someone who had been disappointed before. We'd want you to continue doing exactly what you're doing, but with better resources and the opportunity to serve as a model for similar programs in other communities. Danny looked around the park, taking in the worn field, the makeshift equipment, and the handful of parents who were still lingering to chat with each other. What Alexandra was describing sounded like a dream, but dreams had a way of becoming complicated when other people's money and agendas became involved. I'd need to think about it, Danny said carefully. And I'd want to make sure that any changes wouldn't compromise what we've built here. Of course, Alexandra agreed. Would you be willing to meet next week to discuss this in more detail? I'd like to learn more about your program and share some specific ideas about how the foundation might be able to help. Danny agreed to the meeting, though he spent the rest of the weekend wondering whether he was making a mistake. His experience with institutions and organizations had taught him to be cautious about partnerships that promised mutual benefit, especially when the other party had significantly more resources and power than he did. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near the community college where Danny was taking classes. A neutral location that felt more comfortable than either Alexandra's downtown office or the community center, where the team sometimes held indoor practices during bad weather. Alexandra arrived with a portfolio of information about the Kane Foundation and examples of other programs they had supported, but Danny was more interested in understanding her motivations than reviewing her credentials. Why youth sports? Danny asked after they had ordered coffee and settled into a corner booth that provided privacy for their conversation. I mean, there are a lot of ways to help kids. What made you focus on athletics? Alexandra had been asked this question countless times by reporters, board members, and potential partners. But Danny's version felt different, more personal, and less formulaic. I grew up in a family that couldn't afford organized sports, she said. My parents worked multiple jobs, and we lived in neighborhoods where kids didn't have access to the kinds of programs that existed in wealthier areas. Danny nodded, recognizing the familiar story of economic barriers and limited opportunities. But you obviously made it work somehow. I got lucky, Alexandra admitted. A high school coach took an interest in me and helped me get a scholarship to college. That scholarship changed my life, opened doors that would never have been available otherwise. But I always wondered how many other kids never got that chance because they didn't have someone willing to take a risk on them. End quote. Danny could see the genuine emotion behind Alexandra's carefully professional demeanor, the personal investment that drove her foundation work. So now you're trying to be that someone for other kids. Something like that. Alexandra agreed. The foundation is my way of creating opportunities for kids who might otherwise be overlooked. Danny sipped his coffee, processing Alexandra's story and trying to reconcile it with his own experience. He had grown up in similar circumstances, though his path had been different. Military service had provided him with job training and college benefits, but family responsibilities had prevented him from pursuing the kind of career that might have lifted him into Alexandra's calm, socioeconomic bracket. What exactly are you proposing for our team? Danny asked, ready to move from personal history to practical possibilities. Alexandra opened her portfolio and pulled out a document that outlined a comprehensive support program. We'd start with equipment upgrades, proper gloves and bats for every player, team uniforms, and safety gear. We'd also provide funding for field improvements, better bases, pitchers' mounds, and backstops that would make the park safer and more functional. End quote. Danny examined the equipment list, trying to calculate the cost of what Alexandra was proposing. The total value was more than he made in several months at the warehouse, money that would transform his players' experience and remove the barriers that currently prevented some kids from participating. That's incredibly generous, Danny said. But I have to ask what strings are attached. Alexandra had anticipated this question, having learned that sustainable partnerships required clear expectations and mutual understanding. We'd want documentation of the program's impact. photos and stories that we could use to promote similar initiatives in other communities. We'd also want you to participate in coaching education programs and potentially serve as a mentor for other volunteer coaches. Danny considered the requirements, which seemed reasonable and aligned with his own goals for the program. What about control? Would we still make our own decisions about how to run the team? Absolutely, Alexandra replied. Our philosophy is to support programs that are already working, not to take them over or change their fundamental approach. What you're doing here is exactly what we want to promote. Danny spent the next hour asking detailed questions about the Foundation's other programs, Alexandra's expectations for documentation and reporting, and the timeline for implementing the proposed support. With each answer, his initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism and eventually to genuine excitement about the possibilities. When could we start? Danny asked as their meeting drew to a close. Alexandra smiled, recognizing the shift in his attitude and feeling confident that she had found the right partner for the Foundation's pilot program. How about next week? I'd like to attend another practice, take some photos, and start the process of ordering equipment. The transformation began immediately and accelerated rapidly. Within 2 weeks, every player on Danny's team had a properly fitted glove, a helmet that met safety standards, and a uniform that made them look and feel like real baseball players. The cardboard bases were replaced with regulation equipment, and the field received improvements that included a proper pitcher's mound and a backstop that eliminated the safety concerns that had worried Danny since the ball program began. But the most significant change was in the kids themselves. Sophia, who had been self-conscious about being the only girl on the team, now carried herself with the confidence of an athlete who belonged on the field. Carlos, whose family had struggled to afford even basic equipment, now talked about wanting to try out for his middle school team the following year. Miguel, who had initially been embarrassed by his father's amateur coaching, now bragged to his friends about being part of a special program that was getting attention from important people. Alexandra attended practices regularly, not as an observer, but as a participant in the community that had formed around Danny's team. She learned the names of all the players, understood the family situations that shaped their participation, and developed relationships with parents who initially viewed her with suspicion, but gradually accepted her as someone who genuinely cared about their children's development. The documentation that Alexandra gathered during these visits became the foundation for a case study that would eventually influence youth sports policy at the national level. But more immediately, it provided evidence of what was possible when communities were given the resources and support they needed to develop their own solutions to local challenges. 3 months after their first meeting, Alexandra invited Danny to lunch at an upscale restaurant that he had never imagined entering. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the next phase of the Foundation's support, but Danny suspected that something bigger was being planned. The board has reviewed our documentation from Riverside, Alexandra began, and they're extremely impressed with what you've accomplished here. Danny felt a familiar mixture of pride and anxiety. Praise from important people often preceded requests for changes that might compromise the things he valued most about the program. We'd like to expand the program, Alexandra continued, not just here at Riverside, but as a model for similar initiatives in other communities. Danny set down his fork, giving Alexandra his complete attention. What kind of expansion are you talking about? We want to create a network of community-based baseball programs, all following the model you've developed here. The Foundation would provide startup funding, equipment, and coaching education, but each program would maintain its local identity and autonomy. Danny could see the potential impact of what Alexandra was describing, but he also understood the complexity of replicating something that had grown organically from his specific circumstances and community needs. How would you ensure that other programs maintain the same values and approach? That's where you come in, Alexandra said with a smile. We'd like you to serve as the program director, responsible for training new coaches and ensuring that expansion maintains the quality and philosophy that makes Riverside successful. Danny stared at Alexandra, processing the implications of what she was proposing. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity to do what you're already doing, but on a larger scale and with the resources to make a real difference in kids' lives. Danny thought about his current situation, the juggling act of warehouse work, community college classes, and weekend coaching that left him exhausted but fulfilled. What Alexandra was proposing would eliminate the financial stress that constantly shadowed his family's life, while allowing him to focus on work that felt meaningful and important. "What about my education?" Danny asked. "I'm 2 semesters away from finishing my degree." "The foundation would support your education," Alexandra replied. "In fact, completing your degree would make you more effective in this role." Danny looked around the restaurant, noting the other diners in their business attire and professional conversations. 6 months ago, he could never have imagined sitting in such a place, discussing a career opportunity that seemed to promise both financial security and personal fulfillment. "I need to think about this," Danny said finally. "It's a big decision, and I want to make sure I'm making it for the right reasons." Alexandra nodded, understanding the magnitude of what she was asking. "Take your time. But Danny, I want you to know that what you've created at Riverside is something special. You have a gift for connecting with kids and helping them believe in themselves. That's not something that can be taught. And it's exactly what this program needs to succeed." End quote. Danny spent the next week discussing the opportunity with Miguel, who was initially excited about the possibility of his father having a job that involved baseball full-time. But as they talked through the implications, both father and son recognized that accepting Alexandra's offer would mean changes that went beyond employment. "Would we still coach our team?" Miguel asked during one of their evening conversations. "I think so," Danny replied. "But I'd also be helping other people start their own teams in different places." Miguel considered this for a moment. "So, more kids would get to play baseball?" "That's the idea." "Then you should do it," Miguel said, with the straightforward logic that characterized his approach to most decisions. "You're good at helping kids, and you like doing it." Danny made his decision the following Saturday, after watching his players work through a particularly challenging practice that involved learning to execute double plays. The complexity of the drill required patience, repetition, and individual attention. But by the end of the session, even the youngest players were beginning to understand the coordination required for successful teamwork. As the families gathered their equipment and prepared to leave, Danny realized that what he had created at Riverside was exactly what Alexandra had described, a community of kids and parents who supported each other while balls steam, pursuing shared goals. The idea of helping other communities develop similar programs was both exciting and slightly overwhelming, but it felt like a natural extension of what he was already doing. Danny called Alexandra that evening and accepted her offer, beginning a new phase of his life that would eventually impact thousands of children and families across the country. The Riverside Community Baseball Program became the flagship of the Kane Foundation's network, a model that demonstrated how grassroots initiatives could be supported and replicated without losing their authentic character or community connection. Within a year, Danny was traveling to communities across the region, helping establish new programs and training volunteer coaches who shared his philosophy of inclusive, encouraging youth sports. Each new program reflected the specific needs and character of its community, but all incorporated the principles that had made Riverside successful: emphasis on participation over competition, encouragement over criticism, and community building over individual achievement. The success of the network attracted attention from national youth sports organizations, academic researchers, and policymakers who were looking for alternatives to the increasingly competitive and expensive world of organized athletics. Danny found himself testifying before legislative committees, speaking at conferences, and consulting with professional sports organizations about youth development programs. But the most rewarding aspect of his new role remained the direct work with kids and families. Every Saturday morning, Danny still showed up at Riverside Community Park to coach his original team, maintaining the connection that had started everything. The equipment was now top quality, the field had been professionally maintained, and the program had waiting lists of families who wanted to participate. But the essential character of the Saturday morning practices remained unchanged: kids learning to love baseball while developing confidence, teamwork skills, and lasting friendships. Alexandra often joined these practices, her expensive clothes exchanged for jeans and sneakers that allowed her to participate in drills and games. Her relationship with the Riverside community had evolved from professional partnership to genuine friendship, with parents and players treating her as an honorary member of their extended family. "Do you ever regret getting involved with all of this?" Danny asked Alexandra during one of their regular check-in meetings. "Your foundation work has become much more complicated than it was before we started this program." Alexandra laughed, remembering her initial plans for a simple site visit that had evolved into a comprehensive commitment to community-based youth sports. "Complicated, yes, but also much more meaningful. I've learned more about effective youth development from watching you work with kids than I did in years of reviewing research studies and program evaluations." Danny appreciated the compliment, but he had also learned to recognize the broader implications of what they had accomplished together. "I think we've both learned that sustainable change happens when you support what's already working, rather than trying to impose solutions from the outside." "Exactly," Alexandra agreed. "The most effective programs are the ones that grow from community needs and community strengths." 5 years after Alexandra's first visit to Riverside Community Park, the Kane Foundation network included more than 50 community-based baseball programs, serving thousands of children in underserved and areas. Each program maintained its local identity, while benefiting from shared resources, training programs, and the collective experience of coaches who had learned to prioritize character development alongside ball. Athletic skill development. Danny had completed his degree and been promoted to Executive Director of Community Programs, a role that combined his natural coaching abilities with the administrative skills he had developed through formal education and practical experience. He continued to coach at Riverside while overseeing the expansion of the network and mentoring new volunteer coaches who brought their own unique perspectives and community connections to the work. Miguel, now in high school, had become one of the program's most effective junior coaches, working with younger children while developing his own leadership skills and understanding of what made effective youth sports programs successful. His experience growing up in the program had given him insights that proved valuable in training adult volunteers and designing activities that engaged kids with different skill levels and interests. The success of the baseball program had inspired similar initiatives in other sports, with community groups applying the Riverside model to basketball, soccer, and even less traditional activities like skateboarding and martial arts. The common thread connecting all these programs was the emphasis on inclusion, encouragement, and community building that had characterized Danny's original approach to coaching. National recognition came in the form of awards, media coverage, and invitations to share the program's story with audiences around the country. Danny found himself uncomfortable with the attention initially, preferring to focus on the day-to-day work of coaching and program development rather than the publicity that accompanied success. But he gradually learned to use the platform that recognition provided to advocate for policies and funding that supported community-based youth programs. "I never thought I'd be giving speeches to corporate executives and government officials," Danny told Alexandra during one of their conversations. "Sometimes, I feel like I'm in over my head." Alexandra smiled, remembering her own evolution from sports agent to foundation director to advocate for youth development policy. "You're exactly where you need to be, Danny. You have credibility because you've done the work, and you understand what kids and families actually need. But I still feel like just a guy who wanted to help his son play baseball," Danny replied. "That's exactly why you're effective," Alexandra said. "You're not trying to build an empire or prove a theory. You're trying to help kids, and that authenticity comes through in everything you do." The conversation took place in Alexandra's office, but their relationship had long since transcended the professional boundaries that had defined their initial interactions. They had become collaborators, friends, and advocates for an approach to youth development that had proven both effective and replicable across diverse communities and circumstances. As they looked out the window at the city skyline, both Danny and Alexandra reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them together and the impact they had been able to create through their partnership. What had started as a chance encounter between a volunteer coach and a foundation director had evolved into a national model for community-based youth sports that prioritized character development, inclusive participation, and local ownership. The success of the program had also created new challenges and opportunities. Corporate sponsors were interested in supporting the network. Government agencies wanted to incorporate the model into official youth development initiatives. And academic institutions were requesting permission to study the programs and their impact on participants in communities. Each opportunity required careful consideration to ensure that growth and recognition didn't compromise the essential qualities that had made the original program successful. Danny and Alexandra had learned to be selective about partnerships and expansion, prioritizing sustainability and authenticity over rapid growth or maximum visibility. "What's next for the program?" Alexandra asked during one of their planning sessions. Danny considered the question, balancing his desire to help more kids with his commitment to maintaining the quality and character of existing programs. "I think we keep doing what we're doing, but better. Better training for coaches, better support for families, better ways to measure our impact and improve our effectiveness. And personally, what's next for you?" YSAA. Danny thought about his own goals and aspirations, which had evolved significantly since that first Saturday morning when he had decided to coach Miguel's team. "I want to keep coaching, keep learning, and keep helping other people discover what I've learned about working with kids and building communities." Alexandra nodded, recognizing the consistency between Danny's personal values and his professional work. That's what makes this program sustainable. It's not dependent on any one person or organization. It's built on principles that anyone can learn and apply. The principles that Danny and Alexandra had developed through their collaboration became the foundation for a training curriculum that was eventually adopted by youth sports organizations across the country. The curriculum emphasized practical skills like effective communication, positive reinforcement, and inclusive program design. But it also addressed the philosophical aspects of youth development that were often overlooked in traditional coaching education. The most important principle was also the simplest. Every child deserves the opportunity to participate, learn, and succeed regardless of their natural ability, family circumstances, or previous DAS experience. This principle had guided Danny's coaching from the beginning, and it became the cornerstone of every program in the Kane Foundation network. 10 years after that first practice at Riverside Community Park, Danny stood on the same field, watching a new generation of children learn to play baseball with equipment and support that exceeded anything he had imagined possible. The program had evolved and expanded, but the essential elements remained unchanged. Kids learning to love the game while developing confidence, teamwork skills, and lasting friendships. Miguel, now in college on an academic scholarship that had been partially funded by the Kane Foundation, returned occasionally to help with practices and share his experience with younger players. His presence provided continuity and inspiration, demonstrating the long-term impact that supportive youth programs could have on individual lives and community development. Alexandra continued to attend practices regularly, her role having evolved from observer to participant to advocate for the community-based approach that had proven so effective at Riverside and beyond. Her foundation had grown significantly, but she remained personally involved in the programs that had taught her the most about effective youth development and community engagement. As Danny packed equipment after another successful practice, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from a single father trying to get his son an opportunity to play baseball to a national advocate for community-based youth development. The path had been unexpected, challenging, and ultimately rewarding in ways that extended far beyond personal achievement or professional recognition. The real measure of success wasn't in the awards or media coverage, but in the thousands of children who had discovered their potential through participation in programs that valued character development alongside athletic skill. It was in the communities that had been strengthened by shared commitment to supporting their young people. And it was in the network of adults who had learned to see youth sports as an opportunity to build better communities rather than simply develop better athletes. Danny locked his car and drove home through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, passing houses where many of his current and former players lived, with families who had become part of his extended community. The Saturday morning practices had become an institution that connected generations of participants and created lasting relationships that extended far beyond baseball. As he pulled into his driveway, Danny thought about the conversation he would have with Miguel that evening, sharing the highlights of practice and planning for the coming week. These conversations had become more sophisticated over the years, but they retained the essential quality that had always characterized their relationship: mutual respect, shared commitment to helping others, and the understanding that success was measured not just by individual achievement, but by contribution to community well-being. The story that had begun with a single father's decision to coach his son's baseball team had evolved into something much larger and more significant, a demonstration of how individual initiative, community support, and strategic partnerships could create opportunities that transformed lives and strengthened communities. But at its heart, it remained a simple story about the power of showing up, caring about kids, and believing that everyone deserves a chance to succeed. Danny Martinez had never set out to become a youth development expert or a national advocate for community-based programming. He had simply wanted to give his son and other neighborhood children the opportunity to play baseball in an environment that was safe, supportive, and focused on helping them develop both skills and character. The fact that this simple goal had led to a career dedicated to expanding similar opportunities for children across the country was a testament to the power of authentic commitment and the importance of meeting people where they are, rather than where we think they should be. Alexandra Kane had never expected that a routine site visit would lead to a fundamental re-examination of her foundation's approach to youth development and community engagement. But her encounter with Danny and his team had taught her that the most effective programs often emerged from grassroots initiative rather than institutional planning, and that supporting what was already working was more effective than trying to create something entirely new. Together, they had demonstrated that sustainable social change occurred not through grand gestures or massive investments, but through consistent commitment to core values, respect for local knowledge and community strengths, and the willingness to learn from experience rather than relying solely on theoretical frameworks or best practices developed in different contexts. The legacy of their collaboration extended beyond the specific programs they had created to influence how youth development professionals, philanthropists, and community leaders approached the challenge of creating opportunities for young people in underserved communities. Their model had been studied, replicated, and adapted across the country, but its essential principles remained constant: authentic relationships, inclusive participation, community ownership, and the belief that every child has the potential to succeed when given appropriate support and encouragement. As Danny settled into his evening routine, reviewing notes from practice and preparing for another week of coaching, training, and program development, he felt the quiet satisfaction that came from work that aligned with his deepest values and made a meaningful difference in other people's lives. The journey from desperate single father to respected youth development professional had been unexpected, but it had been grounded in the same principles that had guided his parenting: commitment to doing right by kids, respect for the community that supported his family, and the belief that everyone deserved a chance to succeed. The phone rang as Danny was finishing his review of the weekend's practice notes, and Alexandra's name appeared on the caller ID. These evening conversations had become a regular part of their routine, opportunities to debrief about the day's activities and plan for upcoming challenges and opportunities. "How did the new coach training go today?" Alexandra asked, referring to the workshop Danny had conducted for volunteers from 3 different communities who were starting their own programs. "Better than I expected," Danny replied, settling into his favorite chair with a cup of coffee. "The woman from Phoenix really gets it. She understands that this isn't about creating superstar athletes, it's about creating opportunities for kids to discover what they're capable of." Alexandra smiled, recognizing the enthusiasm in Danny's voice that always emerged when he talked about working with new coaches. "And the others?" "They're learning. The guy from Denver is still too focused on winning and losing, but I think he'll come around once he sees how the kids respond to a different approach. The woman from Tampa is worried about parents who expect their children to be stars, but we talked about strategies for managing those expectations." These conversations reflected the complexity of expanding a community-based program that depended on volunteer coaches who brought their own experiences, assumptions, and goals to the work. Danny had learned that successful replication required not just providing resources and training, but helping new coaches understand the philosophical foundation that made the program effective. Speaking of expectations, Alexandra said, I got a call today from a reporter who wants to do a follow-up story on the program. It's been 5 years since the initial media coverage, and they're interested in documenting the long-term impact. Danny felt the familiar mixture of pride and discomfort that accompanied media attention. He had learned to appreciate the value of publicity in attracting support and inspiring other communities, but he remained uncomfortable with the focus on his personal story rather than the collective effort that made the program successful. What kind of story are they planning? Danny asked. Human interest piece, about how the program has affected individual kids and families. They want to interview some of the original players, talk to parents about the changes they've seen, and document how the community has evolved. Danny considered the request, weighing the potential benefits against his concerns about privacy and exploitation. I'd want to make sure that participation is completely voluntary and that families understand how their stories might be used. Of course, Alexandra agreed. I'll make sure they understand our standards for ethical storytelling. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering upcoming program expansions, budget considerations, and the logistics of the annual conference that brought together coaches from across the network. These discussions had become increasingly sophisticated as the program grew, but they retained the collaborative spirit that had characterized Danny and Alexandra's relationship from the beginning. After ending the call, Danny walked to Miguel's room to check on his homework progress and discuss the upcoming weekend's activities. These conversations had evolved as Miguel matured, but they remained a cornerstone of their relationship and a reminder of the family priorities that had motivated Danny's initial decision to coach. How's the college application process going? Danny asked, settling into the chair beside Miguel's desk. Good, I think, Miguel replied, looking up from his laptop where he was working on an essay. I'm writing about the baseball program for one of my personal statements. Danny felt a surge of pride mixed with curiosity. What aspect of the program are you focusing on? How it taught me about leadership and community service. I'm writing about the difference between being a star player and being someone who helps other people succeed. Danny nodded, recognizing the values that had shaped Miguel's development and understanding of success. That's a powerful message. What specific examples are you using? Miguel turned his laptop screen toward his father, showing an essay that described his evolution from reluctant participant to enthusiastic mentor, focusing on the relationships he had developed with younger players and the lessons he had learned about patience, encouragement, and the importance of creating inclusive environments. I'm proud of you, Danny said, reading through the essay and recognizing the thoughtful analysis and personal reflection that characterized Miguel's writing. This captures exactly what the program is about. I learned it from watching you, Miguel replied. You never made it about being the best player. You made it about being the best teammate and the best person you could be. Danny felt the profound satisfaction that came from realizing that his most important teaching had been absorbed and internalized by the person who mattered most to him. Miguel's essay wasn't just a college application document. It was evidence that the values and principles that had guided the baseball program had also shaped his character and his understanding of what it meant to contribute to community well-being. The following Saturday brought another milestone in the program's evolution. Danny arrived at Riverside Community Park to find a group of visitors from Japan who had traveled to observe the program and learn about adapting it to their own cultural context. The international interest reflected the growing recognition that the community-based approach to youth development had applications beyond American communities and baseball programs. The visitors spent the morning observing practice, asking questions through a translator, and taking notes about everything from equipment management to communication techniques. Danny found their perspectives fascinating, particularly their observations about the differences between American and Japanese approaches to youth sports and community development. During a break in practice, one of the visitors approached Danny with a question that had been translated from Japanese. He wants to know how you measure success if you don't keep score and don't eliminate players who aren't skilled enough to compete at higher levels. Danny had been asked this question countless times over the years, but it never lost its importance or complexity. We measure success by looking at whether kids want to keep playing. whether they're developing confidence and teamwork skills, and whether they're learning to support each other instead of just competing against each other. The translator conveyed Danny's answer, leading to an animated discussion among the visitors that continued for several minutes. Finally, the original questioner posed a follow-up through the translator. He says that in Japan there is great emphasis on group harmony and supporting teammates, but also strong pressure for individual excellence and competition. He wants to know how you balance these competing values. Danny thought carefully about his response, recognizing that the question touched on fundamental cultural differences that went beyond sports and youth development. I think the key is helping kids understand that individual excellence and team success aren't opposites. When everyone is supported and encouraged to do their best, the whole team gets better. The conversation continued throughout the morning, with the visitors asking detailed questions about coaching techniques, parent involvement, volunteer recruitment, and program sustainability. Their interest reflected a growing international recognition that community-based youth development programs offered alternatives to the increasingly competitive and expensive models that dominated organized ERS sports in many countries. After the visitors departed, Danny reflected on how far the program had evolved from its humble beginnings. What had started as a desperate attempt to provide his son with recreational opportunities had become a model that was being studied and adapted by communities around the world. But the essential elements remained unchanged: caring adults creating safe spaces for children to learn, grow, and develop confidence in their abilities. The afternoon brought another reminder of the program's impact. Sophia, now a senior in high school, stopped by the park to volunteer as an assistant coach and share news about her college plans. She had been accepted to several universities and was considering majoring in sports management with the goal of eventually creating youth programs in underserved communities. "I want to do what you do," Sophia told Danny as they watched the current group of players work through batting practice. Not exactly the same thing, but helping kids who don't have access to opportunities. Danny felt the familiar pride that came from watching former players discover their own calling to serve others. "What specifically interests you about youth development work?" "I remember what it felt like to be the only girl on the team and how you made sure I felt included and valued. I want to create that same kind of environment for other kids who might feel like outsiders." Danny nodded, understanding how Sophia's personal experience had shaped her career aspirations and her commitment to inclusive programming. "You have a lot to offer, Sophia. Your perspective as someone who participated in the program will make you more effective at creating similar opportunities for others." The conversation continued as they helped with equipment cleanup, with Sophia asking questions about education requirements, career paths, and the challenges of working in youth development. Danny found himself mentoring a former player, in the same way that Alexandra had mentored him, sharing practical advice while encouraging her to develop her own approach and philosophy. As the day ended, Danny drove home through neighborhoods that had been transformed by the presence of the baseball program and the community connections it had fostered. Property values had increased as families sought to move to areas with strong youth programming. Local businesses had thrived as the program brought visitors and volunteers to the community. And most importantly, a generation of children had grown up with expanded opportunities and strengthened community support. The transformation extended beyond individual participants to influence how the community approached other challenges and opportunities. The collaborative spirit that had developed around the baseball program had been applied to school fundraising, neighborhood improvement projects, and efforts to support families facing economic hardship. The program had become a catalyst for broader community development that went far beyond youth sports. That evening, Danny received a call from Alexandra with news that would mark another significant milestone in their collaboration. The Kane Foundation had been invited to present their community-based model at the White House as part of a national initiative to expand youth development opportunities in underserved communities. "They want us to be part of a panel discussion about effective approaches to youth programming," Alexandra explained. "The focus is on programs that have demonstrated measurable impact while maintaining community ownership and local identity." Danny felt the familiar mixture of honor and anxiety that accompanied high-profile recognition. What would be expected of us? A presentation about our model, participation in panel discussions with other program directors, and meetings with policymakers who are interested in supporting similar BIA initiatives at the federal level. Danny considered the implications of participating in such a high-level forum, recognizing both the opportunities and the responsibilities that came with national recognition. This could open doors for other communities to get the support they need. That's exactly what I was thinking, Alexandra agreed. But I also know that you're not comfortable with too much attention or publicity. Danny appreciated Alexandra's understanding of his preferences, but he also recognized that the invitation represented an opportunity to advocate for approaches that could benefit thousands of children and families. If it helps other communities start their own programs, then it's worth being uncomfortable for a few days. The White House presentation took place 3 months later, with Danny and Alexandra joining program directors from across the country to share their experiences and insights with policymakers, funders, and community leaders. Danny's presentation focused on the practical aspects of starting and sustaining community-based programs, while Alexandra discussed the Foundation's role in supporting grassroots initiatives without compromising their local character. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with audience members asking detailed questions about replication strategies, funding mechanisms, and evaluation methods. But the most meaningful moment came when a congressional representative approached Danny after his presentation to share her own experience as a child who had benefited from similar programming. "I grew up in a community like yours," she told Danny, "and I know how much difference it makes when adults show up and care about kids. Thank you for doing this work and for sharing your story." Danny felt a profound satisfaction that came from realizing that his work had connected with someone who understood its importance from personal experience. The recognition was gratifying, but the real reward was in the knowledge that the program's influence would extend far beyond his own community and the children he had directly served. The months following the White House presentation brought a surge of interest in the community-based model, with inquiries from communities across the country and requests for training and consultation. Danny found himself traveling more frequently, but always with the goal of helping others develop their own approaches, rather than simply replicating what had worked at Riverside. Each new community brought unique challenges and opportunities, requiring adaptations of the basic model to address local needs, cultural differences, and resource constraints. Danny learned to be flexible in his approach while maintaining commitment to the core principles that had made the original program successful. The work was demanding but deeply rewarding, providing opportunities to witness the creativity and dedication of adults who were committed to improving opportunities for children in their communities. Danny found himself learning as much as he was teaching, gaining insights from coaches who brought different perspectives and experiences to the work. A year after the White House presentation, Danny stood on the field at Riverside Community Park, watching a practice that included children whose parents had been among his original players. The generational continuity represented the ultimate measure of the program's success, creating a legacy that would continue long after Danny and Alexandra had moved on to other projects and challenges. Miguel, now in his sophomore year of college, was home for spring break and had volunteered to help with practice. Watching his son work with the youngest players, Danny saw the same patience and encouragement that had characterized his own coaching, but adapted to Miguel's personality and strengthened by his experience as both a participant and observer. "He's a natural," Alexandra observed, joining Danny on the sideline to watch Miguel demonstrate proper batting stance to a group of 7-year-olds. "He learned from the best teachers," Danny replied, watching his son with obvious pride. "These kids, these families, this community, they all contributed to who he's become." Alexandra nodded, recognizing the collective nature of the success they had achieved. "That's what makes this program sustainable. It's not dependent on any one person. It's built into the community's culture and values." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near home plate, where Sophia was working with a new player who was struggling with coordination and confidence. Danny watched as she knelt beside the child, offering gentle encouragement and breaking down the batting motion into manageable steps. The scene represented everything that the program aspired to achieve. Former participants sharing what they had learned while creating inclusive environments for newcomers. As practice concluded, Danny helped with the familiar routine of equipment cleanup and field maintenance, tasks that had remained constant even as everything else about the program had evolved and expanded. The consistency of these simple activities provided grounding and continuity, reminding him that the most important work happened in the daily interactions between coaches and players, not in the meetings and presentations that consumed increasing amounts of his time. The families departed gradually, with the usual mix of tired children and satisfied parents who had spent their Saturday morning contributing to something larger than individual achievement. Danny lingered on the field, enjoying the quiet satisfaction that always followed successful practices, and thinking about the week ahead with its mix of coaching, training, and administrative responsibilities. Alexandra joined him as he made his final inspection of the field, ensuring that equipment was properly stored and that the space was ready for the community soccer program that would use it later in the day. These quiet moments had become important to both of them, opportunities to reconnect with the original vision that had guided their collaboration and to maintain perspective on the broader impact of their work. "What's next for us?" Alexandra asked as they walked toward the parking lot. Danny considered the question, thinking about the various opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. New communities were requesting support, existing programs needed ongoing assistance, and policymakers were asking for input on legislation that could affect youth development funding nationwide. "More of the same, I think," Danny replied. "Keep helping communities start their own programs, keep supporting the coaches who are doing the real work, and keep learning from the kids and families who remind us why this matters." Alexandra smiled, recognizing the consistency of Danny's vision and his commitment to the grassroots approach that had made their collaboration successful. "That sounds perfect to me." As they reached their cars, Danny reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them together and the community they had helped create. What had started as a simple desire to give his son an opportunity to play baseball had evolved into a career dedicated to expanding similar opportunities for children across the country. But the essential motivation remained unchanged: the belief that every child deserved support, encouragement, and the chance to discover their potential. The sun was setting over Riverside Community Park as Danny drove home, casting long shadows across the field where generations of children had learned to play baseball while developing confidence, teamwork skills, and lasting friendships. The program had exceeded every expectation and had created opportunities that extended far beyond Saturday morning practices. But its most important achievement was in the simple truth that it had made a difference in individual lives and strengthened the community that supported it. Danny Martinez had never set out to become a youth development expert or a national advocate for community-based programming, but his willingness to step up when children needed support had led to exactly that role. The recognition and success were gratifying, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that the work would continue with or without him, sustained by the values and relationships that had been built into the program's foundation. As he pulled into his driveway, Danny thought about the conversation he would have with Miguel that evening, sharing the highlights of practice and planning for the coming week. These conversations had become more sophisticated as Miguel matured and as Danny's work had expanded, but they retained the essential quality that had always characterized their relationship: mutual respect, shared commitment to helping others, and the understanding that the most important success was measured not by individual achievement, but by contribution to community well-being. The story that had begun with a single father's desperate attempt to provide his son with recreational opportunities had become something much larger and more significant. But at its heart, it remained a simple story about the power of showing up, caring about children, and believing that everyone deserved a chance to succeed. Danny Martinez and Alexandra Kane had proven that authentic partnerships could create opportunities that transformed lives and strengthened communities, one Saturday morning practice at a time. 2 years later, the ripple effects of their collaboration had reached places neither of them could have imagined. Danny received a phone call on a Tuesday evening that would once again expand his understanding of what their program had accomplished. The caller identified herself as Dr. Maria Santos, a pediatric psychologist at the Regional Children's Hospital, and she had a story that would remind Danny why he had started coaching in the first place. "Mr. Martinez, I hope you don't mind the unexpected call, but I had to reach out to you about one of your former players," Dr. Santos began. "Do you remember a boy named Antonio Rivera who participated in your program about 4 years ago? Danny paused, searching his memory for the face and story that went with the name. Antonio. Yes. Quiet kid, lived with his grandmother. He struggled with confidence, but had a really good arm when he got comfortable. That's him, Dr. Santos confirmed. Antonio is now one of my patients, but not for the reasons you might think. He's been volunteering in our pediatric ward, working with children who are dealing with serious illnesses and injuries. He told me that his experience in your baseball program taught him how to encourage other kids and help them believe in themselves, even when things are difficult. Danny felt a familiar tightness in his throat, the emotional response that always accompanied stories about former players who had carried the program's values into other areas of their lives. How is he doing now? He's remarkable, Dr. Santos replied. He has a gift for connecting with children who are scared or discouraged. He uses sports metaphors and coaching techniques that he learned from you to help them cope with their medical treatments. Several families have specifically requested that Antonio be present during difficult procedures because he has such a calming influence." End quote. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Dr. Santos describing how Antonio's volunteer work had inspired other teenagers to get involved in hospital programs, and how his approach had influenced the medical staff's understanding of how to communicate with young patients. Danny learned that Antonio was planning to study child psychology in college, with the goal of eventually combining therapeutic work with youth sports programming. After ending the call, Danny sat in his living room thinking about the unexpected ways that a simple baseball program had influenced individual lives and professional practices. Antonio's story was unique, but it reflected a pattern that Danny had observed in many former players who had discovered their own calling to serve others and support their communities. The following Saturday brought another surprise, when Danny arrived at the park to find a film crew setting up equipment near the bleachers. Alexandra was already there, talking with a woman who appeared to be the production director and gesturing toward the field where some of the players were arriving early. "What's all this about?" Danny asked, approaching Alexandra with the wariness that had become his default response to unexpected media attention. "Documentary project," Alexandra explained. "The filmmaker is Sarah Kim. She's been following community-based youth programs around the country for a project about grassroots social change. She's particularly interested in our model because of the long-term impact we've been able to document." Danny looked at the camera equipment and sound recording devices, feeling the familiar tension between his desire for privacy and his recognition that media coverage could benefit other communities seeking to start similar programs. What exactly are they planning to film? Sarah Kim approached them, extending her hand with a warm smile that immediately put Danny at ease. "Mr. Martinez, thank you so much for allowing us to document your program. I promise we'll be as unobtrusive as possible, and you have final approval over anything we use in the finished documentary." Danny shook her hand, appreciating the professional courtesy and the respect for his concerns about exploitation. "What's the focus of your project?" "I'm documenting programs that have created lasting social change through grassroots initiative rather than top-down intervention," Sarah explained. "Your partnership with the Kane Foundation represents exactly the kind of collaboration that I believe can address systemic problems while preserving local identity and community ownership." The filming proceeded smoothly, with Sarah and her crew capturing the natural interactions between coaches and players without disrupting the practice routine. Danny found himself forgetting about the cameras as he worked with the kids, focusing on the batting practice and fielding drills that had become second nature over the years. During a break in practice, Sarah interviewed several parents about their experiences with the program and its impact on their families. Danny listened from a distance, as parents described not just the athletic development of their children, but the confidence, leadership skills, and sense of community belonging that had emerged from participation in the DI program. "This program gave my daughter something I couldn't give her myself," said Rosa Morales, whose daughter Carmen had been one of Danny's original players. "I worked 2 jobs, and I was worried about her spending too much time alone or getting involved with the wrong crowd. But here she found a place where she belonged, where adults cared about her development as a person, not just as an athlete." Another parent, James Washington, spoke about how the program had helped his son overcome social anxiety and develop friendships that had lasted years after his active participation ended. Coach Danny created an environment where every kid felt valued and supported. My son learned that he could contribute to a team even if he wasn't the most talented player. And that lesson is carried over into his schoolwork and his relationships with other kids. The interviews continued throughout the morning, with Sarah capturing stories that illustrated the broader impact of community-based programming on family dynamics, neighborhood cohesion, and individual development. Danny found himself moved by the parents' testimonials, many of which described benefits that he had hoped for, but hadn't been certain were actually occurring. After practice ended and the equipment was packed away, Sarah asked Danny and Alexandra to participate in a longer interview about the development of their partnership and the lessons they had learned about effective collaboration between grassroots initiatives and institutional support. What would you say has been the key to maintaining the program's authenticity while expanding its reach? Sarah asked, focusing her camera on Danny as he considered the question. I think the key is remembering why you started, Danny replied. Every decision we make, every opportunity we consider, we ask ourselves whether it serves the kids and strengthens the community. If the answer is yes, we move forward. If it's questionable, we take more time to think about it. Alexandra nodded, adding her perspective on the Foundation's approach to supporting grassroots programs. We learned early on that our role isn't to direct or control, but to provide resources and remove barriers that prevent effective programs from reaching their potential. Danny and his community knew what they needed. Our job was to help them get it." End quote. The interview continued for another hour, covering topics ranging from funding strategies and volunteer recruitment to the challenges of maintaining quality while expanding rapidly. Sarah's questions were thoughtful and well-informed, reflecting extensive research into youth development programming and community-based social change initiatives. Several months later, Danny received an advance copy of Sarah's completed documentary, titled Field of Dreams: How Grassroots Programs Transform Communities. The film featured 5 different community-based programs from around the country, with Danny's baseball program serving as the central case study that illustrated the potential for local initiatives to create lasting social change. Watching the documentary with Miguel, now a junior in college, Danny was struck by how the film captured not just the activities and outcomes of the program, but the relationships and values that made it sustainable. The camera work and editing emphasized the connections between participants rather than individual achievements, reflecting Sarah's understanding of what made the program unique. "This is really good, Dad," Miguel said as the credits rolled. "It shows why what you do matters, but it doesn't make it seem like you're some kind of superhero. It makes it clear that other people could do the same thing in their communities." Danny appreciated Miguel's observation, recognizing that the film's greatest value would be in inspiring other communities to develop their own approaches to youth development, rather than simply trying to replicate what had worked at Riverside. The documentary premiered at several film festivals before being distributed to community organizations, educational institutions, and policymakers who were interested in community-based approaches to social change. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with viewers praising the film's authentic portrayal of grassroots programming and its practical insights into effective collaboration between local initiatives and institutional supporters. The film's success led to increased interest in the program, with delegations from other countries visiting Riverside to observe practices and learn about the model's potential for international adaptation. Danny found himself hosting visitors from Canada, Australia, and several European countries, each seeking to understand how community-based youth programming could address social challenges in their own cultural contexts. One particularly memorable visit came from a group of educators and community organizers from rural communities in Ireland who were dealing with youth emigration and community fragmentation. They spent a week observing practices, attending training sessions, and meeting with families who had participated in the program over multiple years. "What strikes us most is the sense of ownership that the community has developed," said Brendan O'Sullivan, a teacher from County Cork who was leading the Irish delegation. This isn't something that was imposed from outside, it's something that grew from the community's own needs and resources. Danny nodded, recognizing the importance of community ownership in creating sustainable programs. That's probably the most important lesson we've learned. External support can be incredibly valuable, but it has to enhance what the community is already trying to do, not replace it. The conversation continued over dinner at a local restaurant, with the Irish visitors sharing their own experiences with community development and youth programming. Danny found their perspectives fascinating, particularly their insights into how traditional cultural practices could be integrated with modern approaches to youth development. The international interest in the program reflected a growing recognition that community-based approaches to social change offered alternatives to top-down interventions that often failed to address local needs and cultural contexts. Danny and Alexandra found themselves serving as consultants for organizations in other countries who were seeking to adapt their model to different cultural and economic circumstances. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Danny received a phone call from the UAW, Department of Education, inviting him to serve on a national advisory committee that was developing guidelines for community-based youth development programs. The committee's work would influence federal funding priorities and establish standards for evaluating the effectiveness of grassroots initiatives. This is an incredible opportunity to influence policy at the national level, Alexandra told Danny during one of their regular conversations. Your voice on that committee could help ensure that funding goes to programs that actually work, rather than those that just look good on paper. Danny felt the familiar tension between his desire to stay focused on direct service and his recognition that policy work could benefit thousands of programs and millions of children. I'm not sure I'm qualified to be making recommendations about national policy. You're more qualified than most of the people who usually serve on these committees, Alexandra replied. You have practical experience. You understand what works and what doesn't, and you're committed to supporting community-based approaches rather than promoting your own agenda. Danny accepted the appointment, beginning a new phase of his career that combined continued coaching and program development with policy advocacy and national leadership. The committee work was challenging, requiring him to translate his practical experience into recommendations that could guide funding decisions and program standards across diverse communities and contexts. The committee's final report, released 2 years later, established new standards for community-based youth development programs that emphasized local ownership, authentic relationships, and long-term sustainability over short-term outcomes and standardized metrics. The report's recommendations influenced federal funding priorities and helped establish community-based programming as a legitimate alternative to institutional approaches. But for Danny, the most rewarding aspect of his expanded role remained the direct work with kids and communities. Every Saturday morning, he still showed up at Riverside Community Park to coach practice, maintaining the connection that had started everything and reminding himself why the work mattered. The program had evolved significantly over the years, with professional quality equipment, a waiting list of families who wanted to participate, and recognition as a model for community-based youth development. But the essential character of the Saturday morning practices remained unchanged, kids learning to love baseball while developing confidence, teamwork skills, and lasting friendships. Miguel, now graduated from college and working as a teacher in a neighboring community, still returned regularly to help with practices and share his experience with younger players. His presence provided continuity and inspiration, demonstrating the long-term impact that supportive youth programs could have on individual development and community engagement. I've been thinking about starting a program in my own community, Miguel told Danny during one of their Saturday morning conversations. There are a lot of kids who could benefit from the kind of support and encouragement that I received here. Danny felt a surge of pride, mixed with excitement about the possibility of the program's influence extending to a new generation of leaders. What kind of support would you need to get started? Mostly guidance and maybe some help with initial equipment costs, Miguel replied. I've been talking to some of the other teachers, and there's interest in developing after-school programming that goes beyond traditional tutoring and homework help. The conversation continued as they walked to their cars, with Danny offering practical advice while encouraging Miguel to develop his own approach and philosophy. Watching his son prepare to start his own community-based program was perhaps the most meaningful measure of success that Danny could imagine. Evidence that the values and principles they had developed at Riverside were taking root in new communities and new generations. As Danny drove home that evening, he reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought him from desperate single father to nationally recognized advocate for community-based youth development. The path had been unexpected, challenging, and ultimately rewarding in ways that extended far beyond personal achievement or professional recognition. The program that had started with second-hand equipment and cardboard bases had evolved into a model that was being replicated across the country and studied by researchers around the world. But its most important achievement remained the simplest: providing children with opportunities to discover their potential while developing the confidence and skills they needed to succeed in life. Danny Martinez had never set out to change the world of youth development or influence national policy. He had simply wanted to give his son and other neighborhood children the chance to play baseball in an environment that was safe, supportive, and focused on helping them grow as both athletes and human beings. The fact that this simple goal had led to a career dedicated to expanding similar opportunities for children across the country was a testament to the power of authentic commitment and the importance of meeting people where they are, rather than where we think they should be. Alexandra Kane continued to serve as both partner and friend, her foundation having grown into one of the most respected organizations in the youth development field. But she maintained her personal connection to the Riverside program, attending practices regularly and ensuring that the original vision remained intact despite the pressures that came with success and recognition. Together, they had demonstrated that sustainable social change occurred not through grand gestures or massive investments, but through consistent commitment to core values, respect for local knowledge and community strengths, and the willingness to learn from experience rather than relying solely on theoretical frameworks or best practices developed in different contexts. The legacy of their collaboration extended beyond the specific programs they had created to influence how youth development professionals, philanthropists, and community leaders approached the challenge of creating, opportunities for young people. Their model had been studied, replicated, and adapted, but its essential principles remained constant: authentic relationships, inclusive participation, community ownership, and the belief that every child had the potential to succeed when given appropriate support and encouragement. As Danny settled into his evening routine, he felt the quiet satisfaction that came from work that aligned with his deepest values and made a meaningful difference in other people's lives. The recognition and success were gratifying, but the real reward was in the knowledge that the program would continue with or without him, sustained by the values and relationships that had been built into its foundation. The simple act of stepping up when children needed support had created something lasting and significant, proving once again that the most important changes often begin with a single person's decision to care.